For 9 years, a billionaire kept a secret hidden in the west wing of his mansion. His autistic son, who never left his room, never spoke, and was forgotten by the world. Doctors gave up. Family ignored him, till one day a new butler walked in, saw what no one else did, and slowly earned his trust. What happened next froze the billionaire in his tracks, because for the first time his son stepped out. Not because of therapy, but because someone finally listened. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. In a huge and very expensive mansion in Beverly Hills, Reginald Harrington began his morning just like he always did, in complete silence. He was a billionaire known all over the country, always appearing on TV and in newspapers for his success in business. But inside his home, especially in the West Wing, there was a secret he didn't talk about. His 9-year-old son, little Liam, lived in that part of the house and hadn't left his bedroom for more than 3 years. Every staff member knew the rule: stay away from that area. They whispered and called it the quiet zone. Nobody played music, nobody vacuumed, and no one knocked on that door. Reginald never spoke about little Liam at meetings, not even when asked about his family. The boy's door was always shut. The curtains were always closed, and the lights inside were always very dim. No one truly knew what was going on. So little Liam spent every day in the same small space, never stepping outside his room. He didn't talk to anyone and didn't make eye contact when the door opened. He sat on the floor, sometimes under his bed with old pieces of paper and pencils. Most of the time he drew quietly or rocked back and forth, making soft humming sounds. He didn't like loud noises. Even the sound of footsteps outside in the hallway would make him flinch or cover his ears. His world was very small and controlled. His drawings were often just shapes, shadows, or simple houses. There were no people in them. He had no toys, no television, and no books. His food was delivered, but he barely ate. If someone spoke too loudly or turned on a light, he would freeze like a statue trying to disappear. Everyone knew better than to disturb him, and no one was ever allowed inside unless it was his stepmother. Harriet Harrington, Reginald's new wife, had been in little Liam's life for about 4 years. Every morning and every evening, she would visit his room without fail. She always entered without saying a word, stayed inside for a while, and then walked out smiling. Always with perfect hair and makeup, looking calm and gentle. To others, she would simply say, "Little Liam is sensitive and nothing more." Her tone was always pleasant but distant. Nobody dared question her. Some of the housekeepers noticed she never brought anything into the room or took anything out, and they wondered what really happened in there, but they never asked. Harriet's visits were always at the same time, and if anyone walked near the West Wing during those moments, she would give them a cold look that made them turn around. Little Liam never smiled when she left, and he never called her name. In fact, he never made a sound while she was present. Little Liam didn't cry and he didn't laugh. He didn't shout or speak out loud during the day. But at night, when the house was quiet and the lights were off, he would whisper to himself. He always said the same words, over and over again: "Be quiet, don't move, she hears everything." His voice was shaky, like he was scared. Sometimes he said it while hiding under a blanket, and other times he mouthed it without making a sound. The security cameras outside his door never showed much movement. His room had thick curtains, so no light could get in, and the cameras didn't record audio. If anyone was watching, they'd think nothing was happening. But little Liam stayed alert, always listening. When the wooden floor creaked somewhere far down the hall, he would stop breathing and stay still. Every sound made him nervous. Even the soft click of a light switch or the wind hitting the windows made him curl up. The West Wing of the mansion slowly became a place of fear for the staff. At first, a few tried to clean the hallway or dust the walls, but after some uncomfortable encounters with Harriet, they stopped. One maid had once seen little Liam through the barely open door. He was sitting on the ground surrounded by crumpled drawings. His hands were shaking. She didn't speak about it to anyone else. Rumors spread among the workers, but nobody had solid answers. Some said little Liam was just special. Others believed something was seriously wrong. The truth was, no one had ever heard him speak a full sentence. When new staff were hired, they were given simple instructions. Don't go near the West Wing. Stay out of the hallway. Avoid questions. And pretend it doesn't exist. Reginald Harrington, the head of the house, supported that rule completely. But to him, little Liam was not something to be shared with the public or even close business partners. In public, Reginald spoke often about charity and education, smiled for cameras and gave speeches about helping children, but he never once mentioned his own. He had photos of his wedding with Harriet and of vacations in Europe, but none of little Liam. He didn't show any signs of sadness or shame. It was like his son didn't exist. Some journalists had asked about children, but Reginald always changed the subject. "My family is private," he would say with a polite smile. Nice. Behind closed doors, it was like little Liam had been locked away from the world. Even at family parties, birthdays, or holidays, his name was never spoken. The mansion remained quiet, especially on the west side. It was a silence that everyone respected, even if they didn't understand it. Still, inside that locked room every single night, little Liam would mouth the same short sentence to himself like a rule for survival. "Be quiet, don't move. She hears everything." His past job was at a small community center where he helped care for children with different needs, including some who didn't speak or had trouble with touch or sound. The job had been hard, but old man Albert was patient. He didn't expect his next job to take him inside a billionaire's mansion. On his first day, he arrived early and dressed neatly. The house was huge, clean, and very quiet. A tall woman with perfect hair greeted him. "I'm Harriet Harrington," the woman said. Her voice was polite, but her eyes were cold. Old man Albert followed her through long hallways, learning where to dust and where to mop. As they walked, everything felt too quiet. Harriet moved like someone in charge. She gave instructions without smiling. When they passed a locked door, she paused and said, "He doesn't like people. Don't bother." It had no nameplate, no decorations, nothing to show someone lived inside. Harriet didn't say who he was, and old man Albert noticed no one else mentioned him either. The staff just called that part of the house the West Wing. During his tour, they avoided going near it. When old man Albert asked if someone lived there, Harriet only said he stays in his room. That was it. No other answers. Later that evening, dinner was served in the main dining hall, but only Harriet and Reginald Harrington ate there. The staff ate in the kitchen as usual. Old man Albert sat quietly, listening. The other workers mostly avoided conversation. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, he heard a quiet crying sound. It was soft, almost like a child. He looked toward the sound, but Harriet passed by without reacting. There's no concern, no pause, just walking as if she didn't hear anything at all. The hallway outside the West Wing always felt different from the rest of the house. The lights were dimmer, and the air was still. Old man Albert was told to clean only the baseboards and not to go near the door. That night, while he was on his knees dusting, his cloth brushed against something rough. He moved closer and noticed scratch marks around the bottom of the doorframe. Some were deep, others faded. They weren't random. They looked like someone had dragged their nails across the wood. Some were fresh with splinters still sticking out. His stomach felt tight as he realized these weren't old damage from furniture or accidents. They were done by hand. He touched one lightly, feeling how sharp the grooves were. Then he looked back at the closed door. It was completely silent. He wondered if the crying earlier had come from behind it. He didn't know the boy's name, but he remembered what Harriet had said. Old man Albert stayed in front of the door a little longer, looked around to make sure no one was nearby. The hallway was empty. The other staff were likely downstairs cleaning the kitchen or preparing for the next morning. Carefully, old man Albert leaned closer to the door. He didn't knock. Instead, he pressed his lips near the wood and whispered, "You're not alone." His voice was soft, almost like a secret. He waited, listening. Then he thought he heard something faint, a quiet humming. It was so soft he wasn't sure it was real, but it was there, just a gentle sound coming from the other side of the door. Old man Albert didn't say anything else. He stood slowly and walked away, still listening as the humming continued. It wasn't loud or cheerful, but it was a response. It meant someone was there. Someone had heard him. It was the first sound he'd heard from that room. Upstairs, in a private room filled with screens and expensive furniture, Harriet sat in a high-backed chair. In her hands was a small cup of tea, steaming slightly. She watched a monitor showing the hallway. The cameras weren't obvious, but they were there. Tiny ones hidden in corners, watching everything. She had seen Old Man Albert walk near the door. She had seen him whisper. She had seen him pause when he found the scratches. Harriet didn't move while watching the footage. She didn't seem surprised. She took a small sip from her cup and stared at the screen for a long time. Then she leaned back and placed the cup on the table beside her. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes narrowed. "He's going to be a problem," she said out loud, speaking only to herself. Her voice was quiet, but serious. She already knew that Old Man Albert was different from the others who came before. That night, the mansion remained quiet, just like every other night. The hallways were empty, the lights dim, and the West Wing was untouched by anyone else. But now something had changed. Old Man Albert had spoken to the boy, not with a loud voice, not by opening the door, but by simply saying words no one had said in years. "You're not alone." And even if it was small, the boy had responded. From inside his dark room, past the locked door, and through layers of fear, he had made a sound. It wasn't much, just a soft hum, but it meant something. For the first time, there was a connection. Old Man Albert didn't know his name, and he didn't know Old Man Albert's, but something invisible had started. Upstairs, Harriet knew it too. She had seen it with her own eyes. And while everyone else in the house ignored the boy, Old Man Albert had stopped to listen. On his second week at the mansion, Old Man Albert started leaving small paper cranes outside the locked door of the West Wing. He folded them carefully at night using plain-colored paper and placed them on the floor in the morning with a few markers beside them. Blue, green, red, simple colors, nothing too bright. He didn't write notes or leave messages, just the cranes and markers. On the first day, they stayed untouched. On the second day, the markers were still there, but one crane had moved a little, like it had been nudged. On the third day, all the paper cranes were gone, and the markers had been taken inside. Old Man Albert didn't say anything to the other staff. That evening, while he was dusting near the door, he heard something new, a quiet tapping sound. It was steady, like fingers against wood. He paused and listened. It wasn't random. Someone was trying to communicate. The tapping came in short bursts, stopping and starting again like a pattern. Old Man Albert knelt near the door and placed his hand gently against it. He didn't speak right away. He just listened. A few minutes later, there was silence. Then, very faintly, a voice came through. It wasn't loud. It was almost a whisper. "Blue is safe," the voice said. Old Man Albert felt his chest tighten. It was the boy. His voice was small and careful, as if afraid to speak. He leaned forward and said gently, "Then we'll start with Blue." He smiled to himself. It was the first real breakthrough since he started working there. But not everyone liked what was happening. That same day, Harriet called Old Man Albert into the sitting room. Her voice was sharp and her tone cold. "He's not a pet," Harriet said firmly. "Stays in there for a reason. Don't forget your place." Old Man Albert nodded, but his mind stayed focused on little Liam. Later that night, long after the house was supposed to be quiet, Old Man Albert was heading to the laundry room when he heard something from the hallway near little Liam's room. It wasn't the soft humming he had heard before. This time it was sobbing, slow, quiet crying. He froze, trying to understand what he was hearing. As he moved closer, the crying stopped suddenly. Then he heard it click, click, click. It was the sound of footsteps being mimicked, small light sounds made with the mouth. Little Liam was repeating the sound of high heels on the floor. Then silence again, then the quiet thud of someone hiding, maybe crawling under the bed. Old Man Albert didn't open the door. He didn't speak, but he stayed close for a few minutes before returning to his room. That night, he started a notebook. He wrote everything he had seen and heard. He knew this wasn't just sensitivity, it was fear. The next few days, Old Man Albert paid close attention. He didn't change his routine, but he made mental notes of every little thing. Every time Harriet walked near the West Wing, little Liam would go silent, sometimes through the thin door. Old Man Albert could hear him stop breathing for a few seconds when Harriet's voice echoed nearby. Once he dropped something, a marker maybe, and it rolled across the floor. He didn't move to get it. Old Man Albert could hear his fingers trembling as he sat still, afraid to make a sound. It was clear now, the boy wasn't just shy or sensitive. He was scared, terrified even. Old Man Albert spoke softly through the door. sometimes mentioning colors or stories about his old job. He never asked him questions. He didn't push, just made it clear that someone was there, someone who didn't want to hurt him. We continued leaving drawings, and sometimes they were returned with little changes. One morning, he found a small drawing left outside the door. It was simple. A house with a blue roof and stick figure standing outside. The lines were shaky but careful. Next to the drawing was the blue marker. Old Man Albert didn't touch it at first. He looked at it for a long time, then he picked up the paper and gently tucked it into his notebook. He took a blank paper and drew a little stick figure waving. He added a smile and colored the shoes blue. Then he placed it back on the floor. That same day, Harriet passed by and gave him a long, hard look. No words, just a stare. Old Man Albert didn't break eye contact. Something was changing, and Harriet could feel it. Old Man Albert wasn't scared of her, not like the others. That night, as he passed by little Liam's door again, he whispered something he had been thinking about for days. "I believe you." He didn't expect a reply, but the humming came back. That soft, low hum that little Liam always made when he felt safe, or at least calmer. It wasn't cheerful, but it wasn't fearful either. It was the same humming he had heard the first time he responded. Old Man Albert closed his eyes and stood still for a moment. Then he walked away slowly, not turning back. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew something had started. A quiet connection, a crack in the wall that had been built around that boy for years. Upstairs, the cameras were likely watching, and he knew Harriet might be listening, but Old Man Albert no longer cared. He had seen the fear, the signs, and now the first response. Little Liam was reaching out in the only way he could, and Old Man Albert was ready to keep listening. On Sunday morning, Old Man Albert walked quietly to the West Wing with a small box in his hands. Inside were small containers of finger paint, blue, green, purple, and red. Along with them, he placed a folded note on the floor that said, "Want to try?" He didn't knock or say anything. He just set the box down gently and left. Hours passed. The hallway remained quiet, and nothing seemed different. But by evening, when Old Man Albert returned to clean, he stopped in shock. Bright colors covered the walls near the door, or handprints, swirls, and long lines of paint. It wasn't perfect or neat. It looked like a child had explored color for the first time. He smiled but said nothing. The next day, a new image appeared. A small, simple bird in blue. Little Liam never came out, never spoke. But every morning, a new picture was waiting. It was the first time the hallway felt alive. Each day after that, Old Man Albert saw something new on the wall. One day, it was a door drawn in green with a small knob. Another day, it was a large purple face with no mouth. Each one was painted. In silence, without a sound or warning, little Liam never opened the door, and Old Man Albert never saw him leave the room. But somehow the drawings continued to appear. The housekeepers avoided the area, pretending nothing was there. Harriet walked past the paintings without a word. Reginald never came close to that hallway. But for Old Man Albert, each picture was a step forward. He never erased anything. He brought wet cloths, but only to clean the floor. He wanted little Liam to know he saw his work and accepted it. The silence between them now had meaning. The boy was telling his story little by little, in shapes and colors. Old Man Albert never spoke about it to the others. He just kept watching. On the 6th day, something unexpected happened. Old Man Albert was walking through the garden early in the morning, checking on the back steps when he spotted movement near the driveway. At first, he thought it was one of the gardeners, but as he got closer, he realized it was little Liam. He was barefoot, standing near Reginald's expensive black Mercedes. In his hands, he held the red paint. He was using his fingers to draw flowers on the car's side doors. Big red messy flowers, not angry, just bold. Old Man Albert froze. It was the first time he had seen little Liam outside his room. He didn't notice him. He was focused, calm. Old Man Albert took a small step forward. Not to stop him, just to get closer. But before he could say anything, the front door burst open. Reginald stormed out, yelling, "What the hell is this?" He shouted. His voice was sharp, and it startled everyone in the garden. Harriet rushed out right after him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look at Old Man Albert. She went straight to little Liam and grabbed his arm hard. Inside now, she snapped. Little Liam flinched, but didn't resist. Old Man Albert tried to step in, but Harriet shoved him away with her free hand. "You've undone everything," she shouted. Her face was red with anger. Everything. Little Liam was pulled inside, his feet dragging across the ground. Old Man Albert stood frozen, unsure what to do. Reginald didn't say anything to him. He looked at the car, then turned and walked away. The red paint was still dripping down the sides. No one cleaned it. Old Man Albert felt a deep, cold silence fall over the entire property. The cheerful colors from the last few days suddenly felt like a memory. He went back inside, feeling helpless. That night, he walked past Little Liam's room, but there were no new drawings. The hallway was completely quiet again. The next morning, the walls in the West Wing were blank. Every drawing, every brush stroke had been wiped clean. Old Man Albert stood still in front of the wall where the bird had been. Nothing remained. Not even a trace of color. He checked the trash bins. The used paint containers were gone. The hallway smelled like disinfectant. Little Liam's door was shut tight, and no sound came from inside. For 3 full days, Old Man Albert didn't hear anything. No tapping, no humming, no whispering, no nothing. He left gentle notes by the door. No reply. On the 2nd day, he left new paints. Nothing happened. On the 3rd day, he sat outside the door for over an hour, just waiting. The silence hurt more than Harriet's yelling. He knew something inside the boy had been shut down again. Fear had returned. All the progress they made had been erased in seconds. Old Man Albert felt like he had failed him. On the 4th day, Old Man Albert walked to Little Liam's door with no hope. He wasn't carrying paint or paper. He just wanted to check just in case. The door was still closed, the lights still dim, but something small caught his eye. He bent down and lifted the doormat. Underneath it, folded neatly, was a single sheet of paper. He opened it slowly. It was a drawing. A stick figure boy stood behind thick black lines like prison bars. His hands were reaching out, but his face had no eyes, no mouth, just an empty oval. Old Man Albert stared at it for a long time. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. He folded the paper back and held it close to his chest. Little Liam hadn't stopped communicating. He'd just gone quiet again, but the message was clear. He was trapped, and he knew it. Old Man Albert stood up, looked at the door, and whispered, "I'm still here." He didn't greet him or ask questions. Instead, he slammed a manila folder down on the counter with force. The sound made everyone in the room freeze. "This is not your child," he said sharply. His voice was angry, his face tense. Old Man Albert glanced down at the folder. It was his employment file, background, experience, even his emergency contacts. "You're a butler." "No." "That's it." Harriet entered the room seconds later. She was calm, smiling slightly. Her tone was softer, but full of control. "You're causing regression," she said. "He was stable before you arrived." Old Man Albert stayed silent for a moment, then answered, "He wasn't stable. He was afraid." "There's a difference." Reginald stared at him without speaking. After a few more seconds of silence, they both turned and left. Old Man Albert stood alone in the kitchen, more determined than ever not to stop. That night, Old Man Albert waited until the house was quiet. The other staff were asleep. The halls were empty and all the lights were dim. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small audio recorder. It was the size of a pen and easy to hide. He placed it on top of a bookshelf in the hallway near Little Liam's door, where it could be seen easily. He made sure it was turned on and recording. Then he went back to his room, acting like everything was normal. Around midnight, he crept out quietly to check the device. The red light blinked, still recording. He left it alone and returned at dawn. After retrieving it, he listened through headphones. Most of the recording was just quiet footsteps and soft house noises. But at 11:42 p.m., he heard something clear. Harriet's voice, low and threatening. "Make another sound, and I'll lock the door forever," she whispered. Old Man Albert sat in shock for several minutes after hearing the recording. Played it again, just to be sure he had heard correctly. There was no mistake. It was Harriet. No yelling, no slapping, but the message was full of threat. Her voice was sharp and cold. Old Man Albert didn't waste time. He saved the file and sent it to his friend Alfred, a child psychologist he used to work with. Also took a photo of what he found under Little Liam's door that same morning, a small drawing. In it, a towering figure with red eyes stood above a small boy curled into a ball. The bigger figure had long arms and sharp fingers. Alfred replied quickly, "This is psychological abuse. Keep collecting evidence. Be careful. Do not stop." Old man Albert felt both scared and validated. Someone else believed him now. He wasn't imagining things. Something was deeply wrong inside the Harrington house, and he needed to act. Old man Albert decided to stop sleeping in his room. Instead, he grabbed a pillow and a blanket and moved into the hallway near little Liam's door. Set up a small chair and sat beside it each night, staying alert. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, Harriet gave him a strange look, but said nothing. Old man Albert pretended he was just resting during a long shift. On the third night, Harriet passed by again, walking slower than usual. She didn't speak, but her eyes paused on the recorder in Old man Albert's lap. Old man Albert didn't hide it, just stared back. But today, you didn't see his disability first. You saw a man who needed help. That's the kind of companion he needs. But there was more to Victor's offer. Something that would test Liam's pride even further. "There's something else," Victor continued. "Old man Albert spends time at Riverside Academy events, one of the best institutions in the state. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to attend before you refuse," he said quickly, seeing Liam about to protest. "Hear me out. The scholarship is real. The Academy has a program for students who demonstrate exceptional character." "What you did today? That's exceptional character," Clara gasped. "Liam, Riverside Academy. That's the school with the science program you're always reading about." Liam's eyes widened. He checked out books from the library about Riverside's robotics lab, their advanced classes, their college preparation program. But he'd never dreamed he could actually go there. "I can't," he whispered. "I have to work. I have to help with Grandma's medicine." "Now, the scholarship includes a stipend," Victor said. "For your time as Old man Albert's peer mentor, you'd help him navigate social situations, be his companion, show him that his disability doesn't define him. That's worth something, Liam. Let us pay you for it." In that moment, Liam faced an impossible choice. Pride warred with practicality in Liam's chest. His whole life, Grandma had taught him to stand on his own 2 feet, to never be beholden to anyone. But she'd also taught him that community meant accepting help when you truly needed it. "Grandma," Liam looked at her, his eyes pleading for guidance. Clara was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, sometimes angels come in expensive suits. Sometimes help comes when you're too tired to keep fighting alone. Your mama and daddy would want you to have every opportunity. And this man, he's not offering charity. He's offering a chance." "Mrs. Harper is right," Victor said softly. "Liam, I've built my wealth on seeing potential and investing in it. You have more potential than anyone I've met in years. You have something money can't buy. A good heart and courage to match it. Let me invest in you." What Liam said next surprised everyone, including himself. "Okay," Liam whispered, "but with conditions." Victor raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at his lips. "I'm listening. I still work weekends at Grayson's grocery. Mr. Grayson gave me a chance when no one else would, and I won't abandon him. The scholarship stipend goes into a bank account for emergencies, not for spending money." Liam took a deep breath. "If Grandma's health improves, we revisit the medical bills. I can pay you back someday." Victor's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "You're negotiating terms for accepting help? Your grandmother raised a remarkable young man." "Deal," Victor said, extending his hand, "with one condition of my own." "What's that?" Liam asked wearily. "Sunday dinners?" "You and your grandmother join Old man Albert and me for dinner every Sunday. Not as employees or charity cases, but as friends, as family." Actually, let me pause here, because what happened next still makes me cry. Clara broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Liam rushed to her side, holding her as she cried. "It's okay, Grandma. Everything's going to be okay now." "I was so scared," she whispered. "So scared I'd die and leave you alone with nothing. I've been praying for a miracle. And I think maybe this is it." Old man Albert, who'd been quietly watching from his wheelchair, spoke up. "Mrs. Harper, Liam gave me something today too. He gave me back hope. Hope that people can look past my wheelchair and see me. So really, you raised someone who saves people. It makes you pretty special too." They had no idea this was just the beginning of their story together. 3 months later, Liam walked through the halls of Riverside Academy in his new uniform, still not quite believing this was his life now. Grandma's health had improved dramatically with proper medication and treatment. She'd even started volunteering at the local community center, teaching kids to read. But the real miracle was happening right in front of him every day. "Liam, wait up," Old Man Albert called, wheeling down the pathway with a confidence he'd never had before. 3 other volunteers walked with him, real friends who'd gotten to know him because Liam had made it safe to approach the man in the wheelchair. "You ready for the robotics showcase?" Liam asked, grinning. "We're going to crush it," Old Man Albert said confidently. Mr. Jenkins said, "Our design is the most innovative one he's seen in years." What they'd built together was more than a robot. The robotics project was Old Man Albert's idea, a wheelchair attachment that could navigate rough terrain like mud, sand, or snow. "So, no elderly person ever gets stuck like I did," he'd explained. And Liam had helped to make it real, combining Old Man Albert's engineering vision with Liam's practical problem solving. But the project had attracted attention beyond their group. "Mr. Harrington wants to see you both after the event," their instructor said, smiling mysteriously. "Something about a patent attorney?" "A patent attorney?" Liam repeated, confused. "It's for your wheelchair design," the instructor explained. "It's revolutionary, boys. Companies are already asking about it. Can you imagine? People from completely different worlds creating something that could help thousands?" That afternoon, in Victor's office downtown, the pair learned that their design could indeed be patented and manufactured. "If you want to pursue this," Victor said carefully, "I can help, but this is your creation, your decision." Old Man Albert looked at Liam. "What do you think?" Liam thought about all the elderly folks like Old Man Albert trapped when the world wasn't made for their wheels. He thought about his grandmother's words, "Hearts are for helping." "I think we should do it," Liam said. "But any money we make should go to a fund to help families who can't afford the modifications their loved ones need." Victor's smile was brighter than the sun. "I'll match whatever you raise dollar for dollar." But the biggest surprise was still to come. That Sunday dinner, now a sacred tradition, Victor stood up with a glass of sparkling cider. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Liam and Old Man Albert exchanged confused glances. Grandma Clara smiled like she already knew a secret. "6 months ago, a young man saved my butler's life. But he did more than that. He saved our household. He brought light back into our home, hope back into Old Man Albert's eyes, and purpose back into my life." Victor's eyes were bright with tears. "Liam, you've become the young man I never knew I needed. And Old Man Albert, you've shown me that companionship isn't about years served. It's about choosing to show up for each other every single day." "Sir," Old Man Albert whispered, "what are you saying?" Little did they know, this moment would fulfill the promise made in mud and rain. "I'm saying that when Liam turns 18, if he agrees, I'd like to legally welcome him into the family, to make official what's already true in our hearts. That he's family, not as charity, not as payment, but as choice. We choose each other." The room went completely silent. Liam couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was hearing. "You want to welcome me into the family?" His voice came out small, disbelieving. "I want you to be part of our household," Victor said simply. "Both of you, companions by choice, if you'll have us." Clara was crying again, but this time with joy. "Baby, say something." What Liam said next came from the deepest part of his heart. "I already feel like Old Man Albert's close friend," Liam said slowly, looking at the man who'd become his best companion. "And you've treated me with more respect and kindness than I knew adults could show young people. You never made me feel less than. You never made me feel like I had to earn my place. You just chose us." "So is that a yes?" Old Man Albert asked hopefully, his eyes shining. Liam laughed through his tears. Yeah, it's a yes. But, Grandma, baby, I'm not going anywhere," Clara assured him. "I'll always be your grandmother. But having a mentor figure too, having a close ally, that's not taking anything away. It's adding more people to love you." That night, there were no sounds from little Liam's room. Old Man Albert kept checking the door, hoping to see another drawing or a note, but nothing appeared. It was like little Liam had gone into hiding again. The pressure inside the house felt heavier. Everyone was walking quieter, speaking less. It wasn't just quiet, it was controlled. By the end of the week, Old Man Albert hadn't heard a single sound from behind little Liam's door. The silence didn't feel like peace, Felt like fear. He wrote short notes and slid them under the door. Still here. You're not alone. I believe you. But none were returned. Each morning, he checked the doormat, the floor, the corners. No drawings, no colors. No signs of the boy who once covered the hallway with birds and faces. Old Man Albert spoke with Alfred again, sending a second audio file where Harriet told another maid to stop asking about that room. Alfred warned him again, "You're getting close to something serious. Don't do this alone. Someone needs to know." Old Man Albert thought about calling the police or child services, but he knew Harriet had power. She could make things disappear. For now, Old Man Albert's job was to stay close. Stay patient and keep little Liam safe, even if he couldn't respond yet. That night, as he sat in the chair again, Old Man Albert turned off the lights in the hallway. He sat completely still, eyes on the door. His phone was in his pocket, the recorder in his hand. Nothing moved. The house stayed quiet. Humming, no clicking sounds. The silence was so thick it felt like it filled the air. A voice, a footstep, even a whisper, but nothing came. It was the kind of silence that hurt, the kind that screamed without sound. Old Man Albert whispered softly, "It's okay now." Even if he wasn't sure it was true, the recorder stayed on. It wouldn't stop collecting proof. And until the moment came to act, he would not leave that spot. The silence behind little Liam's door was still there. And now he knew exactly what it meant. Old Man Albert sat outside little Liam's door for the second night in a row without hearing anything. No humming, no tapping, no drawings under the mat. It had been 36 full hours of silence. At first he thought maybe he was just scared, but as time passed, worry turned to panic. Something was wrong. He knocked gently on the door again. No answer. The curtains were still drawn. He checked the hallway cameras, but the system had been disabled. Harriet walked by later that morning and with a smile said, "He's finally resting. He needs this. Don't interfere." Old Man Albert forced himself to smile back, then turned away, heart racing. Harriet's words didn't feel like care. They felt like a warning. Old Man Albert knew little Liam. Even his quiet meant something. But now there was nothing. That kind of silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something had been taken. He made up his mind. He would find him today. Around noon, Old Man Albert carried a rag and bucket toward the back of the house. He told another maid he'd be cleaning out the dry pantry, and no one questioned it. He opened the small pantry door, pretending to wipe the shelves and scan the corners. The area looked normal, but something felt off. Then, behind a rolling rack of bottled water, he spotted a panel in the wall, slightly cracked. He pulled it gently. A narrow wooden door revealed stairs leading down into darkness. Old Man Albert took a flashlight from his apron and stepped down slowly, one step at a time, careful not to make noise. The smell grew stronger, mold, dust, and something else. At the bottom, he saw a small, cold basement. In the far corner, next to a pile of old blankets, little Liam sat curled into a ball, trembling. He had no shoes. A thin blanket barely covered him. His lip was bleeding. Old Man Albert ran to him immediately. He knelt beside him, placing his hands gently on his shoulders. "Little Liam?" he whispered. He didn't speak. His eyes were open, but unfocused. His body was cold and shaking. Old Man Albert wrapped the blanket tighter around him, then carefully lifted him into his arms. He was much lighter than he should have been, too thin, too fragile. As he carried him toward the stairs, he clutched Old Man Albert's sleeve with weak fingers. Halfway up, he whispered, "It's okay, I've got you." But when he reached the top, Harriet was waiting. She stood with her arms crossed, blocking the doorway. "You weren't supposed to find him," Harriet said, not angry, just cold, almost proud. Old Man Albert didn't reply. He held little Liam tighter and shoved his shoulder into Harriet, pushing past. Harriet stumbled backward, shocked, but said nothing. Old Man Albert walked straight through the hallway toward Reginald's office. This time, he wouldn't be silent. This time, someone would have to listen. Old Man Albert stormed into Reginald's office without knocking. Little Liam still in his arms, shaking. Reginald stood up from his desk, stunned. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes wide. Harriet rushed in seconds later, her tone suddenly sweet and concerned. "He's inventing things again," Harriet said quickly. "He's confused, maybe tired. Old man Albert ignored her, adored. He rolled up little Liam's sleeve and showed Reginald the bruises wrapped around his wrist. Purple, clearly finger marks. Reginald's face changed, but not enough. This could be anything, he said slowly. I need proof. Old man Albert couldn't believe what he was hearing. Proof. Bleeding child in his arms wasn't enough? He said nothing and turned to leave. Back in his room, he opened his drawer and pulled out a USB drive. Inside was a new video, footage from 2 days ago, secretly recorded audio of Harriet's threats and little Liam's crying. He tucked it into his bag. If Reginald needed proof, he'd get it. That night, old man Albert locked his bedroom door for the first time. He placed a chair under the knob and checked the window twice. His phone was charged. At 2:17 a.m., he heard slow footsteps outside his door. Then a soft knock. He didn't answer. A few seconds later, the doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to open it. When it didn't budge, the footsteps moved away. Old man Albert waited another 10 minutes before standing up. He peeked through the peephole. No one was there. He sat back down and stared at the door. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a fight. Harriet had crossed a line, and she wasn't hiding it. Old man Albert didn't know who would believe him, but he wasn't alone anymore. Little Liam had no voice in this house, but old man Albert had one, and now he had evidence too. Outside the house remained quiet. No alarms, no footsteps, no voices. But inside old man Albert's room, everything had changed. He didn't rest, kept checking the time, listening for sounds, ready to move if he had to. Harriet had shown her true side. Reginald had shown hesitation, but now, old man Albert had little Liam, and little Liam had someone who cared. He took the USB out of the hiding spot again and held it in his hand. This small object could be the key to everything, held Harriet's words, her threats, the proof Reginald claimed to need. Old man Albert didn't know what his next step would be, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't back down. Tomorrow he would make calls. He would send the file to more people if needed. No more secrets. No more silence. Harriet had tried to control everything, but now the door was locked. Old man Albert's door. The war had begun, and he was ready. Breakfast had just begun. The staff moved quietly through the dining room, setting plates and pouring drinks. Reginald sat at the head of the long table, glancing through his phone while sipping coffee. Harriet was across from him, calm as always. Old man Albert stood by the wall, watching the hallway. Then little Liam entered, walked slowly, one step at a time. He looked pale, tired, and weak. Reginald glanced up and looked surprised to see him out of his room. Little Liam reached the table, placed one hand on the chair, and then collapsed to the floor. Gasps filled the room. Old man Albert ran to him and knelt beside him. Little Liam whispered through dry lips, "No more basement." The room went silent. Reginald stared in confusion. Harriet froze in place. Old man Albert stood up and reached into his pocket. "You need to hear this," he said firmly. Then he took out his phone and played the audio. Harriet's voice filled the room. The recording played clearly. Harriet's voice was cold and sharp. "Make another sound and I'll lock the door forever." Gasps followed. The staff looked around at each other, wide-eyed. Old man Albert didn't stop there. He opened a folder and spread photos on the table. Little Liam's bruised wrists, his bleeding lip, drawings of cages and figures with red eyes. Then he played a short video, shaky but clear, showing the basement, the blanket on the floor, and little Liam curled into the corner. "This is what he's been living with," old man Albert said. Harriet stood up quickly, knocking over her chair. "Lies," she screamed. "You're all being manipulated." She rushed toward old man Albert, arms raised. But before she could reach him, 2 security guards stepped in and grabbed her by both arms. "Let me go," she yelled, twisting and shouting. Reginald didn't move. He stared at the table, at the pictures, at the boy on the floor. His hands were shaking. One by one, the other staff members began to speak. First, Martha, the cook, stepped forward. "I saw her slap him once. I didn't say anything because I was afraid," she said. Then Clarence, the older gardener, nodded. "I saw bruises too. I thought maybe he fell, but now I know better." Another maid told everyone that Harriet had forbidden anyone from entering the West Wing. One said Harriet would stand at little Liam's door and whisper threats for minutes at a time. As each person talked, Reginald's face went pale. His body trembled. He looked lost. "Why didn't I see this?" he said quietly. "How did I not see it?" He looked at Harriet, who was still yelling, trying to break free from the guards. Little Liam slowly stood up, knees shaking. He pointed at Reginald and shouted, "She said you'd throw me away." The entire house fell completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Harriet stopped shouting for a moment. Reginald stood still. His face was blank. Then he sat down slowly in the nearest chair, eyes unfocused. The guards tightened their grip on Harriet, and she started yelling again. Old Man Albert stepped between little Liam and Harriet, protecting him with his body. Little Liam clung to his leg, his breathing unsteady. A few moments later, 2 police officers entered the room. They had been called by one of the staff members who had left during the chaos. Harriet tried to talk her way out, still pretending to be calm. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, smiling tightly, but no one believed her anymore. Old Man Albert handed the officers the USB drive with the recordings and the photos. They listened. Then, without hesitation, they placed Harriet in handcuffs. "You can't do this," she screamed as she was walked out of the house. Reginald didn't stop them, just sat in his chair, crying silently. Old Man Albert held little Liam's hand and led him away. That night, the house was quiet, but not in the usual cold, heavy way. The silence felt different. Harriet was gone. No more closed doors. No more whispered threats. More fear echoing through the halls. Old Man Albert cleaned little Liam's room and helped him into clean clothes. He opened the windows and let fresh air in. Little Liam sat on the bed, eyes still tired, but calmer than before. Old Man Albert pulled a blanket over him and sat down in the chair beside the bed. After a few minutes, little Liam pointed at the chair and said softly, "Here," he understood. He lay down beside him, fully dressed, just to help him feel safe. The door remained wide open. For the first time in years, little Liam wasn't locked in. Reginald didn't leave his study. He'd been crying there for hours. The mansion wasn't quiet because of fear anymore. It was quiet because something dark had finally been removed. As the night went on, rain began to fall outside, tapped gently against the windows of little Liam's room. Old Man Albert remained beside him, his eyes closed, but his hand resting on his. He didn't plan to sleep deeply. He just wanted him to know he was there. Little Liam turned slightly under the blanket and whispered, "I told the truth." His voice was shaky, but there was pride in it too. Old Man Albert opened his eyes and looked at him, placed his hand on his shoulder and said, "And now the world will hear you." Too. Little Liam nodded and closed his eyes again. For the first time, he didn't mumble to himself or flinch at hallway sounds. He simply rested. Old Man Albert stayed beside him until morning. The house outside his room was different now. The silence no longer meant danger, it meant safety. Little Liam had spoken, and this time someone had listened. Harriet didn't stay silent for long. Within a week of her arrest, she hired a group of expensive lawyers. News broke that she was claiming mental instability, stating that years of stress and medication had caused confusion and emotional outbursts. "She needs help, not punishment," her lawyers said to the press. Reginald, under pressure, released a short statement. "The family is going through a private matter and asks for understanding." There was no apology, no name mentioned, and no direct support for little Liam. Old Man Albert read it twice and felt sick. He had expected more. He had expected truth. The media, however, didn't stay quiet. Reporters gathered outside the mansion's gates, cameras flashing every time a staff member stepped outside. Photos of Old Man Albert leaked online. His face was shown alongside headlines like Butler or Hero or Harrington scandal deepens. He hated the attention. All he wanted was for people to focus on little Liam, not him. Then the legal process began. Old Man Albert was called to attend an official inquiry led by court representatives and child protection officials. He was asked detailed questions about his time at the mansion, his relationship with little Liam, and the night of the basement discovery. He showed them the USB, the photos, and the drawings. They listened, but their tone was cautious. "We're reviewing everything," they said. Meanwhile, little Liam was scheduled to meet a court psychologist. A friendly woman tried to speak with him, but he didn't say a word. He stared at the wall, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. "He's too scared," Old Man Albert explained. But they wrote in their notes, "Non-verbal, maybe resisting." That night, Old Man Albert found little Liam hiding again, this time inside the closet of his now safe room. "They don't believe me," he whispered. Old Man Albert knelt beside him, hugged him gently, and replied, "They will. I promise you, I won't stop until they do." He didn't speak to the media. He didn't speak to lawyers. Didn't even speak to Old Man Albert. But one night, he saw him sitting at the security console watching old surveillance footage. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He rewound hours of video, weeks even. It was all there. Footage no one had reviewed before. He saw Harriet yelling at little Liam near the stairs. He saw her grabbing his arm hard and pulling him down the hall. He saw little Liam freeze when her shadow appeared. One clip showed Harriet standing at little Liam's door, whispering something, and little Liam curling up against the wall. Reginald paused the video. He sat still for a long time, then hit play again. When it was done, he leaned back in his chair, pressed both hands to his face, and started crying. The next morning, Reginald asked Old Man Albert to meet him in the garden. He didn't bring lawyers or security, just a folder in his hands. "I watched the footage," he said quietly. Old Man Albert didn't respond. "I knew things were wrong," he continued, "but I didn't want to see it. I looked away. I enabled this." I handed him the folder. It contained printed stills from the videos, screenshots of Harriet's behavior. But I won't anymore. That afternoon, Reginald personally delivered the footage to the police. It's not through assistants, not through emails. He walked in himself and handed everything over. The authorities began moving faster. More charges were prepared. The court psychologist returned, this time more understanding, more gentle with little Liam. Still, little Liam didn't speak, but he watched everyone more closely now. He looked at their faces, their hands, their shoes. He was learning who was safe, and for the first time, he didn't run when people approached. That evening, the household sat down for dinner, just like always. But this time, something was different. Little Liam was there, seated quietly at the main table between Old Man Albert and Reginald. The dining room had been adjusted. Lights softer, no music, no loud clattering. Staff moved slowly and respectfully. No one stared at little Liam. He looked around the room, unsure but curious. Old Man Albert helped him with his plate, cutting the food into smaller pieces, just how he liked. Reginald didn't speak much. He waited, watched, gave little Liam space. The boy ate slowly. Bit by bit, he finished his meal without interruption. When dessert was served, he didn't touch it. Instead, he turned toward Reginald, who had stayed silent the whole time. Little Liam stared at him for a few seconds, then said in a quiet but clear voice, "Thank you for seeing me now." Reginald blinked fast, surprised. He nodded. "You're welcome, son," he whispered back. The dining room stayed quiet after that. Nobody clapped, nobody cried. Everyone just kept sitting there still, letting the moment happen. Old Man Albert smiled softly, watching little Liam return to his food. Reginald stayed seated long after dinner ended, looking at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. When little Liam got up to leave, he didn't look afraid. He didn't hide behind Old Man Albert. He walked beside him, slow but steady. Upstairs, the bedroom door stayed open again. Little Liam picked out a fresh pair of pajamas and laid them on the bed himself. He brushed his teeth with help. He even picked up his favorite marker, blue, and left it on his nightstand. That night, he didn't sleep in the closet. He got under the covers, and Old Man Albert sat by his side. He whispered one more sentence. "I'm not scared right now." Old Man Albert leaned closer. "You don't have to be," he said, and he believed him. The courtroom was full by the time Harriet Harrington entered. Her face looked calm, her clothes perfectly pressed, and her posture confident. Cameras flashed outside. Journalists sat in the back, rows taking notes. Lawyers filled the front seats. On one side, Reginald sat alone. On the other side, Old Man Albert sat beside little Liam, who was holding a small blue marker in his hand. He wasn't drawing, just holding it. A therapist sat behind him for support. The judge entered and everyone stood. The trial began. Harriet's defense claimed stress, mental fatigue, and false accusations. She spoke clearly, saying, "I only ever tried to help him." But Old Man Albert didn't stay quiet. He presented the audio recordings, Harriet's voice whispering threats, Then came the photos of bruises, the basement, and the scratch marks. Old Man Albert read notes from other staff members who had been too scared to speak before. The room grew heavy with silence as evidence kept coming. Then the court asked if little Liam wanted to speak. Old Man Albert looked at him gently. The therapist nodded, signaling that it was okay to try. Little Liam stood slowly. His legs were shaky, but he didn't back down. The judge asked softly, "Do you want to say anything?" Little Liam looked at Harriet for just a second, then turned toward the judge. In a quiet voice, he said, "She made me afraid of doors." That was all. Just one sentence, but it was enough. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Harriet's lawyers looked down. The weight of the words sank into everyone sitting in that courtroom. Doors had become symbols of fear to a child. Not monsters or nightmares, just doors. The judge asked no further questions. Little Liam returned to his seat and squeezed Old Man Albert's hand. The trial continued for 2 more hours, but the mood had shifted completely. The courtroom wasn't just hearing evidence now, they were feeling it. After 2 more days of testimony and review, the judge returned with the verdict, guilty on all charges. Harriet Harrington was convicted of child abuse and psychological torture. The sentence was clear: 11 years in prison, no early release. As the gavel struck the bench, Harriet's face finally changed. She didn't cry, but her eyes dropped, her expression cracked. She was led away in handcuffs without speaking. Reginald stood as she passed him, but she didn't look at him. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions, but no one answered. Later that day, Reginald gave a statement to the press. He admitted his failure to protect his son and announced that he was stepping down from his position as CEO. He also pledged $25 million to national autism support programs. His voice shook during the announcement. "I failed," he said, "but I'll spend the rest of my life helping others like little Liam." Cameras clicked, but no one clapped. A week later, Old Man Albert sat with little Liam inside a courtroom office. A judge smiled gently at them and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Albert. You've been granted full guardianship of little Liam Harrington." It was official. Old Man Albert signed the final documents and turned to little Liam. He smiled, a real, calm smile, no fear in his eyes. They left the courthouse and headed home in a quiet car ride. The city passed by outside the windows. On the way, they took a route that led them close to the old mansion. It stood behind tall gates, as cold and silent as ever. Little Liam looked out the window. He stared at it for just a few seconds. Then he turned his head away. "Can we plant something instead?" he asked. Old Man Albert nodded. "Of course," he said. The car kept moving. That old house, with all its secrets, was now part of the past. Little Liam was choosing something new, something alive. Later that afternoon, they stood in the backyard of their small home. The air was warm. Birds moved through the trees. Old Man Albert handed little Liam a small shovel. "Wherever you want," he said. He picked a spot near the back fence beside a small patch of soil. Slowly, carefully, he dug a small hole. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it one last time. It was a drawing of a black door, tall and wide, with thick lines. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it into the hole. He covered it with dirt, pressing the ground down with his hands. "Goodbye," he said softly. Old Man Albert knelt beside him. "You'll never be behind one again," he whispered. Little Liam looked up at him and nodded. Then he stood up and walked inside. For him, the drawing wasn't just paper. It was a memory. And now it was buried. The next day, little Liam asked Old Man Albert if they could plant a real tree where the drawing had been buried. "A small one," he said, "but something that grows." Old Man Albert smiled and took him to a garden shop where he picked a sapling, a young cherry blossom. They brought it home and planted it in the same spot. As the roots were placed into the dirt, little Liam whispered, "This one is mine." Old Man Albert stood beside him, placing his hand on his back. They watered it together. Days passed, and the backyard became a place where little Liam liked to sit, draw, or just rest. The fear he once held in his body began to fade. His drawings changed to no more dark doors, no more red eyes. Now there were trees, blue skies, and people holding hands. He wasn't just healing, he was changing. And with Old Man Albert beside him, Every day felt safer than the one before. 6 months had passed since the trial. Life for Old Man Albert and Little Liam had changed in many ways. They lived in a smaller house now. No gates, no staff, just a quiet neighborhood with open yards and kind neighbors. Old Man Albert had left behind his job at the mansion and was now working part-time at a local autism resource center. Little Liam was attending weekly therapy, joining small group activities, and slowly building trust with the world around him. One afternoon, Old Man Albert came home with flyers in his hand. "What do you think about helping me with something big?" he asked. Together, they started planning a community mural project. The idea was simple. Invite children on the autism spectrum to come paint, express themselves, and feel seen. Little Liam didn't answer right away, but later that night, he brought Old Man Albert a sketch, a figure breaking through a wall flying into a yellow sky. Old Man Albert knew that was a yes. On the day of the event, the empty wall on the side of the local community center became a canvas. Buckets of paint, boxes of brushes, and trays of markers were spread out across the ground. Parents and kids began arriving. Some children were nonverbal, others wore headphones, and some stayed close to their parents. Old Man Albert greeted each one with patience and a smile. Little Liam stayed quiet, but watched everything. When it was his turn, he picked blue and black paint. He started at the bottom corner and worked slowly. His section showed a boy standing next to a large cracked wall, arms raised. The top part showed him flying into a bright yellow sky. The sky took up most of the space. No doors, no locks, just open space. Other children painted beside him, animals, names, flowers, stars. It didn't need to be perfect, it just needed to be theirs. Everyone was free to create. Later that afternoon, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Reginald stepped out quietly. He wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans and a plain shirt. He walked toward the mural slowly, carrying a small bag with a paintbrush and gloves. Old Man Albert saw him and gave a polite nod. Little Liam turned, saw his father, and paused. Reginald didn't speak. He picked a spot next to Little Liam and knelt down. "May I?" he asked. Little Liam looked at him for a few seconds, then handed him the yellow paint. Reginald dipped his brush and began painting tall sunflowers next to the yellow sky. He didn't try to talk too much. He just painted beside his son. When the mural was finished, Old Man Albert added the final touch. Black letters across the top. "I was never broken, just unheard." Some parents teared up. A few clapped. Little Liam stepped back and looked at the full wall. His smile was small but real. That evening, back at home, Old Man Albert and Little Liam set up a small picnic in the backyard. They laid out a blanket, a basket of food, and a small container filled with cupcakes they had baked together the day before. Chocolate with blue icing, Little Liam's idea. They sat under the open sky. The stars weren't too visible at first, but as the night grew darker, more appeared. Old Man Albert handed Little Liam a cupcake. "For the artist of the day," he said. Little Liam took a bite and nodded. No big words, just calm. The house behind them glowed with soft yellow lights from the kitchen. After dinner, they brought out flashlights and made silly shadows on the wall. Little Liam laughed, not loud, but with ease. Old Man Albert noticed how different his face looked now. Relaxed, peaceful. That kind of peace had taken months to grow, and now it was normal. No more locks, no more hiding, just home, just safety. When it was time for bed, Little Liam walked up the stairs on his own. Old Man Albert followed, but he didn't ask him to stay. His bedroom had changed. The walls were light blue, his favorite. The shelves were filled with books, toys, and markers. But one thing was new: glow-in-the-dark stickers on the ceiling. That night, Little Liam used a flashlight to draw extra stars up there, with removable paint. When Old Man Albert came in to say goodnight, he pointed at the stars. "I made these," he said. Then he walked over to the window and pushed it open. The night breeze came in gently. Little Liam stood there for a few seconds, then turned around. "I want it open tonight," he said. "Blue is safe now." Old Man Albert walked over, kissed his forehead, and sat on the edge of the bed. "'Cause now," he said, "you choose when the door opens and when it doesn't." Little Liam nodded once, then lay down. The room stayed quiet, but not in a heavy way, not like before. Little Liam pulled the blanket up to his chest, his flashlight resting beside him. Old man Albert turned off the light but left the door open just like he liked it now. As he walked out, he paused at the hallway entrance and looked back. Little Liam was staring at the ceiling stars. He looked peaceful. For the first time in years, sleep didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to rest in. Downstairs, old man Albert made tea and sat by the window. The mural, the voices of other children, little Liam's painting, all of it stayed fresh in his mind. What had once been silence and isolation had now become expression and choice. Little Liam had chosen blue. He had chosen to speak. He had chosen the window open. And most importantly, he had chosen freedom. And for little Liam, that door would never close again. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe.